We revised as of lunchtime. I remember the very old days when we had overheads, and you could just say, no, 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 and now you're just like stuck, So I just want to kind of get to the essence of things and see what's important to say, and I think people have said a lot already, and I didn't want to really repeat any of that. So I'd like to just reflect a little on why this last phase of my career has been in the work of resilience. I thought pretty much before 2001 that I was going to continue along the lines of social and emotional learning. And in fact, when I would arrive at a New York City school, some of the kids would say, the peace lady is here, because they would know me through the program that I had started called the Resolving Conflict Creatively program. And I thought I would continue that work and that was my work. That was my calling. And I have to say that I was always grateful that both my inner calling and my outer life of service coincided. And I find that to be a huge gift. I don't know how many of you in the room could say that, but it is something that not a lot of people have pulled off. And if you feel you are in a situation right now where you know that what your inner calling is telling you to do in the world is reflected in the work that you're doing, that is a huge gift. But then we have to make sure we don't burn out doing it. That's, I think, the challenge then when that happens. And so one of the things I began to be involved in is wondering whether, and this is when I was editing this book, whether the inner life of children and teachers could possibly be brought into the educational arena. And I remember friends, when I was writing this, said, why would you want to end your career on that note? Because that's not going to get you anywhere. That just makes no sense at all. That there's no proof of any of this, and the inner life, what is that about, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a challenge. And the interesting thing is, I was grateful enough to be part of a group of 18 people as part of the Fetzer Institute that were chosen nationally to integrate their field with the inner life. So mine was in education. And so I got a chance to be with 17 other people for 3 years to really dive into this. And I feel they were my fairy godmothers, and we still are to this day, literally. We would do anything for each other at any time because we really, really tried to say, so can we add this dimension we all know and feel as part of who we are, and for me, lives and moves and has it being, can we bring that into secular education in a way that is okay and makes sense? And when that poor little kid that I tell the story about in Schools with Spirit came up to me when I was too young to be an assistant principal and mostly involved with older kids, and then had to be at second grade lunch, and I'm sort of bringing one kid over and he bites my hand, and it's like, what do you do with that? I mean, how do I respond to that? And then the next kid says, my grandpa died over the summer. Where did he go? And I wanted to say, and I almost did, go ask I think I did, well, maybe you should ask your mommy and daddy. Now, not realizing that those are the mysteries that we need to be able to be there to answer for children. And it doesn't mean that we answer it. It means that we're there and present with them. I could have said, I don't know. I wonder about that too. What do you think? Et cetera, et cetera. So it was very clear that we get the impression that this inner part of who we are can't be brought into schools. And so when I edited this book, quite honestly, I said to the publishers, Maybe in 5 years I'll get a keynote around this, but this is way ahead of its time, quite honestly. And I said, by the way, when is it coming out? And she said, well, we rushed it a little. We really feel this book needs to come out. It's the third week of August, 2001. And 10 days later, I began to ask this question, and then 10 days later, New York City, former principal in the New York City schools. This is a kid who saw too much at the school closest to Ground Zero. And this is one of many teachers who ran on that day. And as I said to you this morning, there were over 8,000 kids and 400 adults that helped kids evacuate 11 schools. They were waiting to hear what to do, but everybody forgot there were schools. Their emergency plan couldn't work because it would go to the next school, but that didn't work. So each principal individually made the decision, we need to evacuate and go either to what's called the West Side Highway or the East Side Highway and walk uptown away from it. And they did that in the most incredible way to help kids have as safe a feeling as possible on that day, including some teachers walking backwards so the kids wouldn't look at the tower coming down, and singing songs. So again, what they tried to do, these adults, as by the way, any single one of us has done, is to be so present for young people that we almost forget it's the instrument of ourselves that is the only thing they have. And it's not selfish for us to take care of ourselves. So we had things like this principal who's in her cafeteria, which students were not in yet, overlooking Ground Zero, and she lost her sister in 9/11. So we were dealing with a lot of trauma all at once. And we began to be there for kids without a question, as many of us in the room are all the time. And yet, this is what I saw happening. Wayne Mueller, the book Sabbath. Have you ever had a day like that? When you know that, you're doing good badly. There's too much to be doing to be able to do any of it well. And that's what I saw teachers, parents, and principals doing after this big event. But you know what? Many of us were doing it on September 10th. And we do not need another event like this to acknowledge that if we are going to be there on the front lines, we have to be there for ourselves as well. I always say, when you make your list of your best friends, are you on it? I mean, as simple as that. No, I'm not. Uh-oh, something's wrong here. So we began to realize that this is what the teachers needed. And again, those of us that are in the serving professions, there's no way we could get balanced without having something that begins to balance us, like was just spoken about, and we'll talk a little more about some of these other things that we did with teachers. So as I mentioned, we began the Inner Resilience program. Had no idea it was going to last this long. The money came in big checks. It was 9/11. And basically, I remember the September 11 Fund saying, remember you have to help these 8,000 kids that ran for their lives. And I said, well, I think I have to help the teachers and adults first. And literally, and he's given me permission to say this because he's had a change of heart 15 years later. He said, that's too bad. I don't know if we could give you the money for that, meaning helping the adults. And then I remember him saying, well, Lantieri, you have, this is how they talk in New York, you have about a week to have a proposal to me that sounds a little scientific. And I guess I took that slide out, but basically, what began to happen is that I looked at the research on vicarious traumatization. How many of you know that word, those words? It's the sort of inescapable effect that having an open heart with people that are in deep trauma can have on you as a professional, on me as a professional. Vicarious traumatization. And another word is compassion fatigue. But those of us in the mindfulness field know that compassion would never make you fatigued. So I'm going to have an apologies to Figley, Dr. Vo. And I know you had apologies to John because he initiated the words compassion fatigue, but it really should be empathy fatigue. It's like we can't quite have compassion fatigue because compassion is something that really balances our empathy and begins to help us respond in ways that would only be uplifting, would not be exhausting. So I submitted it, and lo and behold, I began to get the money, and yes, I began to see that this is why. Because on September 10th, Parker Palmer, who's one of my favorite people in the world of education, small wonder then that teaching tugs at the heart, opens the heart, even breaks the heart, and the more one loves teaching, the more heartbreaking it can be. And you could put counseling, you could put any of the service professions that we are in. The courage to teach is the courage to keep one's heart open in those very moments when the heart is asked to hold more than it is able. And I know many of us in this room have felt that. Because if you asked yourself this question, from 0 to 10, with 0 being, you know what, it's not very balanced at all right now, exercise doesn't count, no. That was great for me. That was, you're speaking right to me. That was a sermon right to me. What would you give yourself, right? From 0 to 10, with 10, no. I feel there are a lot of stresses, a lot of things I'm responsible for, but I'm also taking care of myself. There are ways in which I am replenishing myself. I think we have to ask ourselves that question all the time, but then in our communities, educational communities, we've got to do things that help teachers do that and help educators do that. I'll talk more about those things in my session tomorrow, but a little bit of thinking that I've been doing around resilience, and I realized that the two things for me that are in play with how resilient we are in a situation, and people have said this in different ways this morning, is first conditioning. How learning of resilience is encoded in our brain in the first place. Now, we're adults now. Do we even know that answer about ourselves? In many cases before 9/11, people didn't. They became very, very stressed out, way more than somebody else. And they had no idea why. Well, it has to do with this, that there's been conditioning of how one deals with trauma in one's life based on past experiences, and as people have said in the room, particularly 18 months and below, and 2.5 years really solidly, and then by 5, really, really solidly. And we begin to encode those neural pathways in terms of how we're going to do this. So one of the big things after 9/11, when I said to people, and we ran many, many retreats, what have you learned? You know, I was in the integration phase, and they said, I learned what really is an emergency. So the expression would always be, you know, when like the memo had a typo in it, by the way, this isn't an emergency. We know what an emergency was. That happened on 9/11. It began to set it straight inside of sort of what is, what isn't an emergency. There's many things that are conditioned for us right now. Do we know what they are even? Sometimes we don't know what they are until a deeper adversity comes our way and we realize, wow, we're not as strong as we thought we were, or the opposite. My goodness, I feel like I'm staying in balance even in spite of it. So that's one that I think is worth looking at. And when we had our retreats with teachers, there was a lot of remembering of other times when they felt helpless, like at 9/11. And depending on what people did with those past times, it affected deeply how they were responding in the present. But then the good news is neuroplasticity. If I were talking to you 15, 20 years ago, I would have said, and isn't that a shame? Try to redo your childhood, But the good news is that neuroplasticity is real. We can shape the neural pathways of our brain differently. And this is Richie Davidson, who's a good friend and a neuroscientist. Just read it to yourself. So literally it means that today we're reshaping our brain in certain ways by what's been said, by how we're integrating it, by how we may be thinking differently. Every action starts with a thought. I may be jogging tomorrow morning and I will leave you alone if I see you. I know you don't want to jog with me. Teasing you. Teasing you. Okay, so interestingly enough, that's the good news. But because of conditioning, we've also got the other neural pathways, right? So it's this balancing act between the two that we need to be paying attention to. So you're going to take everybody's kind of interpretation of, so what are some of the things that really matter? Well, for me, I have seen clearly that as we talked about this morning, what we are learning about mindfulness matters greatly, greatly. It shifts our perspective, rewires old patterns, and avoids reinforcing negative patterns. Basically, it helps reshape the brain. If I could think of it this way in relation to the experience of 9/11, right afterwards, there was a lot of work on what was called outer preparedness. Do you have enough water down in the basement of your school, et cetera, et cetera. It went on and on. I don't know if you have this here, but we have emergency packets in every room. It's major stuff, major stuff. And all of a sudden, as I was seeing the largest school system really in the world doing this, I began to say, but on that day, I just said to myself, on that day, it was inner preparedness that helped people. They didn't have anything. They couldn't even go ask their supervisor, should I run with kids or should I stay? They had nothing except their own selves and their ability to center, to go to that wise place inside themselves, to stay calm, to think clearly, all of the things you talked about this morning. So how could we put some money in that account, put some deposits in the account of that, so that when we are in situations that need our balancing act, that we're not at that time getting ready to try to put them in there. There's not going to be time to do that. I remember when I read the biography of Gandhi and heard that when he was shot in the heart, after he was shot, he said the word God. Now, he wasn't having a good day. These two were so connected for him that in that moment, it was one and the same. That's what's possible. That's what's possible. We can be ready, for anything that comes our way, because we know that it's not quite the trauma itself even though we have a lot of those charts. I want to be careful with that. It's also how we respond to it that absolutely makes the biggest difference. Now, it's not to say that early childhood stuff, really is serious. It is. But the good news is that how we respond to stress and trauma and adversity is equally important. So for the kids, for example, at 9/11, who got caring, calmer adults around them right afterwards, when they would hear a plane and poor kindergarten kids would go running into a corner and hold each other, and they didn't even know why. Well, they needed trauma-informed discussion about what was happening to them. And that's what adults can do in that kind of environment. But the adults had to be ready to be able to do that. And the second most powerful thing, without a question for me, that rewires our brains is empathy and compassion. And again, there's a lot of beginning research on that. So just another point of view. Run, enjoy each other with compassion, and take some time to go within for mindfulness. So we've got sort of this balancing act going on around the kinds of things we need to do. One last thing, and then I'd like to end with a 4-minute video having some young people, children actually who are very young, and some adults sharing a little bit about what it feels like when the adults are taken care of along with the kids. Jacob Needleman, wonderful man, philosopher and author, was one of the 18 people with me at the Fetzer Institute. And one day he said to the whole group, he called us children, even though he was like maybe 10 years older than me. Make sure you remember the difference between your talents and gifts so you can offer the world your gifts. And everybody went on, and I said to myself, I have no idea what the difference is. So finally I went, wait, Jerry, hold on a second. I don't think I know what the difference is. So he said, okay. He says, well, talents are things that you do in the world that you could think of lots of other people I could do. But your gifts are what only you are going to give to the world, or it won't happen. The person you're going to call, somebody else will call them. No, not necessarily, unless you were signed up somewhere and you're not really acknowledging that you are. So it began to help me really, really be more astute about the kinds of things I get involved in, I have to say. I'm realizing that, if I'm working at something that there are a lot of wonderful people, come on in, mindfulness people in particular. There's so much good work happening. We don't need to have another program in mindfulness for schools. Let them do that. This is really important. And they feel that that's their gift. Their talent, rather, and gift as well. We have to come in touch with what ours are. That, I think, helps to hold on to the calling. When we're involved in things that we realize, how did we get this list of things that we're doing? Then we have to begin to reassess and say, is this right? As many teachers that went on retreats after 9/11, and we did over 38 of them, they were residential retreats from Friday to Sunday, as many people ripped up their letters of resignation as wrote them after the retreat. And I think we have to have the courage to do that through our entire lives in relation to what work we choose. And if we could give ourselves a good number of balance, then probably it's a good match. We're figuring out how to serve the world in that way and also not harm ourselves in the process. But if that's not happening, we need to change it. Parker Palmer says this, he said, you have to ask yourself that you always have to do the work before the work. Meaning this, when I was having this great Fetzer experience, and it lasted 3 years, 4 retreats a year. It was an amazing abundance of riches in terms of taking care of oneself. At one point, somebody had the brilliance to say in the group, I wonder what the universe has in mind for us after this gift. It was like, oh, right. Well, for me, it was literally, Fetzer ended October 2001, and Inner Resilience started by January of that year, 2002. So little did I know that I was doing the work before the work. So then I could say yes to that work that came my way. I'm glad I didn't know about it ahead of time, believe me. Most of the time when we're given work that we are not sure about, it's better we don't see the whole picture, actually. We might run the other way. But it's important as the work starts to come that we ask ourselves this question. How do we need to prepare before I'm ready for this task with this particular group of people in this community? So I'd like to end with a video. And let me just say one thing about this video, because when you see a certain piece of it, part of it, it may surprise you. One young girl, and I might need your help here if somebody could come up. One young girl says, on the death of my grandmother and 3 very, very close friends, when I saw the raw footage, I said, wait a minute here, what's going on? It turns out that it was 4 years ago when a family's fireplace went on fire at Christmas, and all 3 children were killed, and the mother, and she was close to that family. Her family was close to that family. So, and then upon that, she lost her grandma. So it was true. Take a look at what you see in relation to some of the resilience and how, when we take care of the inner life of both children and teachers, some things could begin to happen that help us cope in different ways.
Sometimes the bell helps me.
Help you?
Like when the sound, it's like very relaxing.
How do you
It's a
use
good
it?
thing to do in school because if we don't do mindfulness, we would just be too worked up the whole day. So, and mindfulness kind of calms everyone down.
What I like about the Inner Resilience program is how it's given us a way, a language, curriculum to enable children to learn coping mechanisms, steps to calm down, steps to be peaceful.
I used it for when I'm calming down and when I'm a little wild and when I'm feeling sad. I always know I can use it. Well, at recess, I get really excited about stuff. So when we come back from lunch, we do tensing and relaxing.
Heighten everything and make your body as stiff as you can. And now, let go.
You get that resolved after that few moments of what we call reflection, and that's on my schedule. You walk in, they see it, and you hear an audible ah when they walk in and see it on the schedule, because they know that that's their moment to let it all go.
The kids have come up with all different kinds of things themselves. The latest one is the elevator, where they all sit straight and they go, and they love it.
Well, the Peace Corner is like a nice relaxing thing, so you can like relax. Because when you're feeling worked up, you can actually go there.
Frankly, I'm amazed at like what I imagined and what the reality is. It's far more than I ever could have anticipated. The warmth amongst the people who have participated, the community that's been created, I think has had a tremendous effect on the work relationships and on people's ability to work together in meaningful ways.
The parents in our community have really, you know, made this a huge part of what they're doing. So we're all learning together, and I've never had that opportunity before as a teacher to learn side by side with parents and to share the same common language and also priorities, that they understand what I'm doing in the classroom and they're supporting at home.
The real beauty of this program is to give them tools, and all of us tools, to help deal with the stresses in life. And what better gift can you give your children than the ability to face fears, problems, concerns, stresses, and to deal with them.
With the deaths of my grandma and my 3 very, very close friends, I needed to use the Peace Corner a lot.
I think it's them learning that they have the mechanisms to take care, the coping skills to take care of themselves, whether it be a stress of a test, or that they got teased, or whatever it might be, that they have tools within themselves to take care of themselves.
Mindfulness is very helpful.
The first time you do mindfulness, you're not going to be that good. You're not going to do it perfect. Your mind's going to wander probably. And whenever you're sad, maybe you could use it. Even at your house when you're feeling a little cranky, then you could use it too. It's very nice to have mindfulness. Then you can always feel happy.
I would just end with this. The human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it. And this is a group of kids who were in a playground after 9/11 and invited the firefighters and the police officers to go up to the 3rd floor and look down. And I think you could see the thank you, yes? Yeah, so thank you to you. I'm going to turn it back over.